Good evening. I'm just going to jump on and get started. I just want to do a quick audio and visual check from everybody. If you can confirm in the chat bar on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel, you should be able to see Property Investment Event as the title with a red slide and hear me okay. So we'll just get a few people just jumping in and saying hello and you can hear. I'll take that as a sign to get started. But for those who can hear, and I'll assume it is okay, I'll jump in. I'm really pleased tonight to be joined by Jane Slack-Smith. Jane is an amazing property investment guru across the nation. I love Jane's approach to property investment, her educational resources, mortgage broking resources, but then her excellent strategy advice and know-how, with a particular focus on renovation. So how to renovation for profit, and potentially sell at the end of the renovation, but more necessarily renovation for profit across the nation and learning from how she's done it in the past. So I'm really pleased to have Jane online tonight. We will be going through some content together and looking at some of her educational resources and some hot tips, and then relating it back to Ripehouse as a tool to be able to execute some of her ideas and resources. So that will be sort of rounding it out with some top renovation tips and then looking at some individual areas and trying to become experts in those areas in order to successfully purchase within. So a few of you have come back and can hear okay. So there is a thank you, Jean and Adam and Sally. Nice to see a few of those familiar names there again. Hope you have been well. I'll jump into the slide now and introduce Jane. Thank you so much for coming online. Are you there, Jane?
Yes, how are you going?
Wonderful, Jane. Sorry, I'm a bit new with all these buttons over here, but thank you so much for coming online and welcome to tonight.
It's an absolute pleasure. You know I love chatting about renovation and Ripehouse.
Good topics. I think we're addicted to them.
Exactly.
A little bit of information about Jane. I've got a couple of sentences here, but Jane has recently published a book, Your Property Success with Renovation, where she talks about purchasing 2 properties and 1 renovation and what that can do for you moving forward. She has an amazing repository of educational resources with a flagship educational course through Your Property Success. And Investors Choice Mortgages has been a mortgage broking business that Jane's been running and was voted, is it twice, Jane, as mortgage broker?
Yeah, very proud of that accolade.
I think it's a very good accolade. It would be excellent. The other, this is Jane was also voted as one of the top 4 investment experts in Australia, along with Paul Clitheroe, John Simmons from Aussie Home Loans, and also Scott Pape, and also Jane. So I think you're amazing at what you do and your approach to property investment, and you've guided me over the years. I think we attended I attended your first seminar or daily session in Mossman, probably 2008 or 2009.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming along tonight and sharing your insight.
I really appreciate being invited.
I suppose a lot of a bit of catching up to speed. You do host a course, which is quite regularly, but have the intakes of that course through Your Property Success site. But the course is called Ultimate Guide to Renovation, and there's quite a few listeners on the line tonight who have actually current students of yours within the course. So I just wanted to say a big welcome to all of you, and thanks for coming along. And thanks. Also, I suppose there's quite a few other Ripehouse email list and software subscribers that have also come and joined us tonight. So I'm sort of reaching out to both audiences, and I just feel what Jane has got to say and help us with is going to be relevant for everyone. Also, I suppose, Jane, with your course, which is runs for 12 weeks, but we developed together a special version of the Ripehouse functionality, which was customized to what your students do and what they need to achieve in the course, and that's an extra or a customized version of Ripehouse functionality. And just letting everyone know that's what I might be referring to tonight, and then also using and demonstrating the full annual version of the software using a renovation and for profit strategy yeah, so reference tonight will be made to the Ripehouse community and annual subscription for membership. So.
Well, I know that the students that have been in the Ultimate Guide to Renovation have had, 3 months of access to the kind of customised Ripehouse software, have really enjoyed it. And obviously, our focus is renovation, and be that flippers or people who want to buy and hold or buy and sell, i.e. flippers, do cosmetic renovations or structural renovations. It's really allowed them to get into that due diligence part of finding the right suburb, the right area in the suburb that we teach. So yeah, it's been beautiful complementary kind of add-on to the course.
Wonderful. Yeah, excellent. And welcome to all the course members. I'm really excited to have you here tonight. And I'm glad that you've, I've obviously talked to a few of you and finding the tools sort of relevant to that. It's really good. A little bit about me though, Jane. For the guys who are just jumping on and seeing me for the first time, at Ripehouse we try and have regular webcasts. It's a great way of talking about new research and content and new elements to how we can use not just Ripehouse but potentially other tools to help us as investors. And I think it comes back to me as an investor. I've always tried to invest in my own education, I suppose, first, and that's how I've come across what Jane was doing those years ago. And we'll touch on in a few slides, but the Trident strategy that Jane sort of taught has been something that's guided me personally with my investing. I've been investing since I was 19, so for over 10 years, but I've always tried to invest in becoming a DIY property investor. So that's another term that I use quite a lot, someone who's doing it themselves. And, in that process, we might make mistakes and we might sort of overcompensate and go in one direction and then realize we might need to focus on cash flow in the next purchase. But it's all that process of learning and refining our process and the tools we use. So, yeah, I founded Ripehouse in 2011, and I love working in what I do with property and technology. It's sort of something that I love to do and work with other investors. So that's sort of a little bit about my investment background. But jumping back in, Jane, to this slide here, which is what I really wanted to sort of jump into quickly, is the nuts and bolts of the book that you put out around 2 properties and 1 renovation. Can you take us through the content of this one a little bit? Beautiful.
I have to say, I wrote it under a bit of duress, to be honest with you, Jacob. I had Wiley's, the publishers, heckle me for a year going, you got to write a book on renovation and your strategy. And I said, look, there's not a lot of new stuff in property. And they said, yeah, but no one's heard your story. And I'm like, oh. So after a year of convincing, they finally pulled me across the line. And then I spent a lot of time writing the book. And I know that one of the reasons I started Investors Choice Mortgages and then subsequently Your Property Success was, for me, I wanted to be able to show everyday Australians that it is possible, just with 2 strategic property purchases, to be able to create wealth and freedom for themselves. So that was the whole premise of the book, which was, if you buy a property, let's say year 1, allow it to be in an area with some capital growth and for it to go up in value. In year 3, you have enough equity there to pull out and do a strategic renovation, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And once you've done that strategic renovation, your rent goes up. So, it helps you pay for, a little bit more of the difference between the cost of the property and the income of the property. When the property goes up, better yield, and in year 5 you have enough money to buy a second investment property. And essentially that's it. 5 years buying 2 properties, taking the equity from your home initially, get on with life and enjoy yourself. 15 years later, if you decide then that you do actually want to sell your 2 investment properties, and one of the things that I find when people talk about, selling down properties, they don't include all the costs. So one of the things I do is, I include all the capital gains tax, I include, the selling costs, etc. At that period of time in 15 years, using, the median income, 79,000 for men, 54,000 for women, medium house prices, medium loan amounts, and 2 kids, car payments kind of stuff, standard kind of credit card. The average Australian family can put $1 million in their bank account, and at a 5% return, that's $50,000 a year. So, for me, it was just about not dumbing it down, but just making it showing some step-by-step practices and step-by-step ways of having a low-risk strategy to be able to create a portfolio and get on with living life.
I like the way it's simplified into steps as well, with a timeline to work to. yeah, it makes things easier when it's broken down, but I really love the concept.
Yeah, and obviously, there's some people who want to have a bigger income than that or do it faster, and there's ways to do that and really targeted analysis up front and buying the right property in the right area, and that's why, I'm such an advocate of Ripehouse as a tool to be able to, really get into the information and being an mining engineer, I love Excel, I love study, I love, research, so for me
Beautiful.
it's so complementary to get in and get that research done and finding the right property.
Yeah, yeah. And 1 million equity in the bank is what we're sort of aiming for.
Absolutely. Freedom.
This is, I suppose, I've touched on it, and you've just touched on it. Can you talk to me about the Trident strategy? I've got top 3 reno tips here as the title, which is leading into our next few slides, but it really is centered
Yeah.
around this strategy. And what can you take us through the core elements of it?
And look, I think the thing is that when I speak to a lot of people about what is their property investing strategy or what has been their strategy in the past, and as you can imagine, I talk to a lot of people every week, from Investors Choice Mortgages of people who are looking at getting finance,
Yep.
and I get to look at their portfolio and get some sense of where they've come from and where they want to go. And I can almost read a portfolio like a book and see why they might be so disappointed and applaud them for coming back and having another go at buying properties, because sometimes you don't always get it right. And I think a lot of people, there's so many people in Australia that invest in property, but very few who buy a second or third.
Yep.
And, people like myself, there's less than 14,000 that have over 6. So, I know that a lot of people depend on that hope strategy, and hope is not a strategy when it comes to property investment. You really need to have a strategy. And for me, I was a trained explosives engineer, so everything I did every day was looking at risk. So I wanted to be able to minimise risk, because when I started, I only had $45,000, so I had to get it right.
Yep.
And I decided that I wasn't going to depend on just one way of making money. I was going to have 3 ways. So if I really stuffed up one way, I at least had 2 to fall back on, plan A, B, and C. And that's really where the Trident strategy came from. And I wanted to be able to make money in 3 ways from any property. Now, in the short term, it was being able to understand the area and do the due diligence and understand what the market price was and see opportunities that others couldn't, and buy below the market. So buying below the market and getting instant equity. Now, that's not always possible, especially in a fast-moving market, and sometimes you have to just get into the market, and it might be one of the things that you sacrifice. But, I've always been able to buy below the market, and I know I've got clients these days who are doing exactly the same, and we know what's happening in the Australian property market today. It's very fast. So, buying below the market for me was sometimes just looking at opportunities that others didn't see. So, I might be buying a 3-bedroom house for, the price of a 3-bedroom house, but with the ability, without much effort under the current floor plan or roof line, creating a 4-bedroom house, which is actually worth a lot more. So it's about being a bit innovative there as well. The second way is actually in the midterm, as I said, year 3, kind of doing the renovation. You don't have to rush into renovation, even if it is your strategy is property renovation, to add equity and add, a rental income or increase the rental income. And for me, renovation, I've done that in all of my properties, and I've been able to, jump in. My very first property I bought for $425,000, a 5% deposit. Half of my money went to the stamp duty, and I borrowed $50,000. 9 months later, that $425,000 property was worth $700,000. I pulled out $100,000 when I did it again. So other than that $45,000 of my initial money, I never had to put extra dollars in to actually purchase properties. It all came from equity. So your renovation allowed me to leverage immediately equity gains from a property. And then in the long term, my strategy is buy and hold. I can't tell you how to sell a property because I never have. But, being able to target areas that have above average capital growth means that my property is also growing in value. So I've got 3 ways of making money, and that's essentially the Trident strategy.
It makes a lot of sense. And just touching on one point, and me personally, it has made a lot of sense for me for a few years, because you're covering the risk factors and you've got multiple upsides. But then, if you're forced, and this is, I suppose, where Ripehouse comes in, if you're forced to buy around the corner of your family home, that's your level. I refer to it, I suppose, as the catchment area. Your comfort level and your catchment area.
Mm-hmm.
Your ability to find capital growth may be limited. Your ability to then buy below market in that area may be limited, etc. If you increase your capital, catchment area across the whole of the country, you're absolutely finding the key capital growth markets, and then within those, you're able to assess and vet them for, disparity buyers versus sellers. You're still able to buy and negotiate quite hard and under market. And then you've got lots of scope there for finding properties that are unrenovated, etc. You've opened your catchment area up across the whole of the country, becoming experts in these remote markets, and therefore able to execute a Trident strategy more consistently or reliably, potentially.
It's interesting just picking up that point, Jacob. I speak to people a lot and they say, look, I'm going to buy my suburb because I know my suburb. And I say, well, these are the basic things that I would determine as key characteristics of knowledge before I invested. So, what is the median price? What is the average demographic age? What is the typical property? What is the yield? What is the vacancy rate? What is the council's attitude towards development? What's the infrastructure plans? And, if you can't answer those things, you don't really know your suburb, and you think that you're familiar with a suburb because you live there. In reality, you put the investor hat on, and that's the top 5. I've got a spreadsheet of 30 kind of things that I look at, and that's the kind of thing. And with Ripehouse, you can pull up really quickly, and as you said, increase your catchment of where you could invest.
Yeah, big time. Or you can be greedy, I suppose, and that's what it comes back to.
Have it all.
You can potentially have it all, or be more likely to achieve on all of your key requirements. The 3 that we've got listed here. If you open things out further and become reliable experts in those areas, and have a framework to operate in and becoming that expert, and also knowing when you are getting to that point where you can comfortably. But then if you are a local area expert, you're as potentially more likely as an owner-occupier, looking at things from the investor's perspective, higher yielding streets, higher renting streets where tenants are demanding to live, etc. So these experts and these, I suppose, investor experts would be the other point. But exactly. I love the simplicity of it, and I really, I do wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, Jan. I think it's excellent. So, I suppose in application, renovation was a key component here to manufacture growth and minimise risk through, manufacturing that equity right off the bat. That's, mitigating the risk of prices dropping after purchase. One of, a key component of the strategy there, Jane, is that renovation. You've got 3 tips here that you've proved, I suppose, and learned from and found. Could you take me through that?
Exactly. And I just, I guess number 1 tip is understand that if we're going to make money out of renovation and we're going to renovate for profit, then it is not like renovating your own home. It's not your wish list that, you've carried with you for the last 10 years. This is the strategic renovation. And a strategic renovation really has to be target focused to properties that you can add value to. And, it's not like buying their rundown property in the street and renovating it, because you can do that, but you may not make a profit. So it's really important to understand with a strategic renovation that the property has the capacity to add value to make you money. So a number of things come into play there. You need to be able to have pricing disparity within a suburb. That means that there's enough of a difference between a renovated and an unrenovated property for you to go and buy a property, renovate it, and make some money. So, I always say that you should be making at least $2 for every $1 that you spend. And, I think that a lot of people, I speak to valuers all the time. And something as simple as, putting a pool in, and you say, someone's about to put a $50,000 pool in, how much value is that going to add? And they go, 30 grand. I'm like, really? That's not a strategic renovation. That's a lifestyle choice, So, you need to be with, I guess my number 1 top tip is just understanding that, if renovation is part of your property investment strategy, and the reason you do that is to create equity and to improve the rental income, or if you're going to sell the property, create equity so that, or funds so you can go and do it again. If you need to do that, you need to have a very clear understanding that there's a capacity to add value, and it comes down to the pricing disparity and the cost of the renovation. So if you looked at, the median value of a property in the area and you took away, the cost of the renovation that you were going to do and the cost of holding the property whilst you were doing it, you wanted to be buying the property at, well below that mark to be able to make some money. You need to put your profit margin in there as well. So a strategic renovation is very different to, what we all kind of like to do at home and, improve things to our own tastes.
Beautiful. And these are a couple of images from examples that you've done in the past, but these are obviously presented very nicely.
That's the end result.
Taste. Excuse me. Yeah, so tip 2. I've got the title here, what are the fastest, least expensive ways to add value? Some nice quick wins.
Yeah, look, it's really about that bang for the buck, and that picture there on the right is the end result of a cosmetic renovation that we do a case study on in the Ultimate Guide to Renovation. A really run-down, tired-looking property, and not spending, in this case, more than $25,000. That really, got us a beautiful new property, landscape, painted, rendered, and updated kitchen and bathroom without having to pull out the whole kitchen and bathroom and redo it. So it's around modernisation, and where we spend the most money is where the most value is, and that's usually is the kitchen and bathrooms that people look for, and that's where the biggest bang for the buck can really be seen. And I guess there's some other little tips that I'd suggest as well, and that is maybe doing floor sanding.
Yep.
And sanding the floors and modernising the property, making it light and bright, making it welcoming when you even walk into the property. So we're looking about, creating that first impression, and there's no better way of doing that than looking at the street appeal. So, people make their first impression within the first 30 seconds or so. So if they're going to pull up to a rundown house, you don't want it to be the surprise property when they open the door, go, wow, I never expected this here. You want the whole package to look good. So they're pulling up and the street looks great, the landscaping looks great, you've had some thought around what the colour scheme looks like, you've created an atmosphere before they even step in the door. So would-be buyers, for those who are flipping a property, or would-be renters, are almost sold before they open up and get wowed by what you've done with the floor sanding that leads through to the kitchen and into the bathroom. And one of the other tips that we have, particularly that has been used a lot for obviously selling a property, but can also be used for renting a property, is staging the property.
Yep.
So that's actually, putting furniture in place, and sometimes this might cost, and you wouldn't do this at the low end of the market, but this might cost $2,000 to $3,000, but it sets the scene once again. And I have had clients in the past who've actually gone around and grabbed all their friends' best looking furniture and put it in their property. In actual fact, I had one client in Mossman in Sydney who pretty much cleared out his own house and went and put it in his unit, and he reckons he got $30,000 more by people being able to imagine being in that property. So something I think is as simple as staging the property, but the fastest, least expensive ways to add value, around the kitchen, around the bathroom. Don't expect that you have to rip everything out. We show our students how to, paint the bench tops or replace the handles and just create the impression, because it is all about perceived value. It's not about actual cost.
Yep.
So we want someone to walk in and go, hey, this is worth $1 million.
Yep.
It didn't cost you $1 million to get there. And the difference between that perception and the actual cost, that's your profit.
Just jumping out of me with what you've been saying, you've presented the kitchen here. It's very white. It's very light and welcoming, and that's it's deliberate. I think just a point taking from what you've sort of said, engaging. If we are purchasing remotely or we are purchasing in suburbs we're not familiar with, it's gauging reliably the condition of properties, and then being able to pay accordingly. And if something's not presented or presented controversially, and white is very neutral and it's very light and it's very wide appeal, which is going to get the most value, knowing when you see that and knowing to pay accordingly, vice versa, and when you don't see it, how that might detract. Because this is jumping out at me, and I think it looks fantastic.
It's clean, simple lines. You're not creating an objection for anyone. Some of my and we'll move on to this for the next slide, but some of the mistakes I've made, my very first property, I decided a purple feature wall would be fantastic, and I was lucky that someone from the symphony orchestra with a creative bent thought so too. 10 years on, purple feature wall, didn't really fit into, that historical house. So I think we make a lot of mistakes. And look, I'm currently going through a revamp of one of my properties. I'm doing it remotely from another state. I've got a project manager looking at it. I had a chat to him yesterday, and he said, gee, there's some really great colours for, doors at the moment. I'm like, we keep it white. It's always white, clean. Let's just keep it clean. I have a colour scheme that I use everywhere, which means that I can, put my antique white USA pot of paint in the back of the car and go to any one of my properties and touch up anytime I want.
My colour's whisper white, sorry, Jane.
It's okay. There's like 300 different whites. You can have your own.
Beautiful. And on the second picture there, I haven't seen it before, obviously, but I'm assuming is that been rendered on the front there, and the landscaping seems to have a really nice effect.
Look, this was a really rundown property, and these are a low maintenance kind of plants, and the property itself, it had one of those daggy old air conditioners hanging out of the front window. That deck area there wasn't anywhere. It wasn't a place that you'd want to hang out, but now it's been creating a bit of an extra room where you could go and hang out and have your cup of tea in the afternoon. So it's really around creating the space and creating for people I guess it's not the opportunity, but it's creating the visualization for them of what they could have. So, walking into a property, I've walked into properties before, and you might have a room that has a baby border around it, and someone walks in and goes, well, this house won't work because I don't have a baby.
Yep.
Really? You can rip that out and paint it over it. And some people don't have that vision. So sometimes it's stepping back and going, what can I do with this? And really seeing, it doesn't have to be expensive. As I said, maybe just resurfacing an old tired an enamel bath, or replacing the bench tops for your kitchen. You don't have to pull out the whole kitchen, or maybe just putting some modern lighting in place like you can see in that first picture. It's about creating the perception, and that's all about where the profit is in renovations.
No, I love it. I just wanted to skip forward as a segue, but a reverse segue, because I knew the title of this on here is the most common mistakes to avoid.
I think, look, there's a lot of things that people do wrong. As I said, I think a lot of times that people do renovate to their own tastes, and they see this property as their opportunity to create their wish lists.
Yep.
So, the theatre room, and it might just not be fit for the market or the target audience for the area that you're looking at. It's lovely to have a Caesar stone bench top, but, I did a quick little kitchen tidy up earlier in the year for another one of my properties. It did not deserve a Caesar stone bench top. This time, this property, it's on a rent at $750 a week. They deserve a Caesar stone bench top. So, you need to make sure that it's fit for the market. You don't want to overcapitalise. And what I find is a lot of people don't have a plan, and they don't understand how much things are going to cost either. And, one of the things, the Ultimate Guide to Renovation client students can tell you is, we've created over 20 years a spreadsheet of the cost of pretty much everything and every I'm going to say duty, painting, landscaping, you name it, that needs to be done, and a cost estimate for all of those, and so that you can kind of anticipate what the cost would be and budget it out before you even go and put an offer in on a property, really, and get a feel for how much it's going to cost you and how much profit there could be. And once again, we come back to that pricing disparity. So, I've also got, students that I've worked with that have more than 10 investment properties, and they've gone through the course and they've gone, oh my gosh, I was just about to pull out this kitchen, and you've made me realize that I can actually repurpose a lot of this. Beautiful. I don't have to pull things out. So you can see here pictures of, completely gutted rooms. Potentially getting in on the first day with a sledgehammer is not always the best option, and pulling out the kitchen and bathroom because you want to start from scratch may actually be cutting into your profit. So you need to understand that. I think that, as I said, it's just simple things, overcapitalizing, going with, we've just talked about it, going with, fancy color schemes or the latest trend. I mean, I had mosaic tiles too in that very first property. I can tell you tenants do not clean the grout in mosaic tiles. So when I revamped that bathroom, out came the mosaic tiles. So, you just need to have neutral colour schemes, a clean colour scheme, something that allows other people to put their own personality and touch to the property, be they renters or be they buying as a home or as you're flipping a property. But I think the biggest mistakes that I see, and the biggest problem that I see, or the thing that cuts into the profit, is definitely the overcapitalization. So you really need to have a strategic renovation. You need to be planning that renovation and making sure that that budget that you have, you keep to. And it's not a wish list. It is, you have to have a specified budget, and that's what you're actually keeping to. And that's where, you can start eating into the profits if you don't get it right.
Yep. It's awesome advice. And I'm sort of going to make the point in a moment, which does relate to what you've just said then around, you've got to renovate for what's around it and not overcapitalise for that property, but then also overcapitalise for the suburb around it is really what's happening. Where this slide here, which is sort of coming back into how can we assess this condition, on the before and the after, and look at what's the potential overcapitalisation point and what that may be for the suburb, and then renovate through to it. But then also on the other side, renovate up, assess the poor condition property as well, to make sure it is in poor condition and we can find comparables to assess things. So, this is what in reality I'm trying to, Jane, go to and work out if we are going to overcapitalise or not, and try and teach a strategy around doing that.
Absolutely. Well, I would definitely be putting a Caesar stone kitchen into Mossburn, but not necessarily Mount Druitt.
Yeah, definitely. And this is obviously Sydney-based, 2 suburbs here, but it's really the simple point on this slide is, renovate to and buy at the suburb and compare like for like. Because, when we're doing this online, and Ripehouse is a tool that helps you, research and analyse things across Australia, it's sometimes hard to do with images, and sometimes hard to get that bearing. It's sort of a technique that I sort of use in structuring the tool and helping and talking with investors with the tool, is just putting the key elements into poor, average and good buckets. If you can get them into one of those buckets, we're taking an average all the way through those buckets downwards and spitting out at the end what we think the property is. We can then go away and find comparables that are in a similar condition. We do the similar process with the comparables. Are they actually comparable? And then we spit out at the end, a short list of comparables to form our appraisal on, getting that right with each property. And it's difficult to do sometimes with images, but obviously we're not going to get it perfect. We're going to have to, it's no replacement for doing a physical walkthrough, but we can get it to a point where we're talking about commoditized type of properties in investment class suburbs, potentially, where we have got it down to a bit of a science. And I'm just looking, as you've said, street appeal, absolute key in that first impression, kitchen, bathroom. But then on the flip side of how you've presented your properties for the profit, leveraging when they haven't been presented like that, and obviously paying accordingly. When they're tenanted and have very bad presentation and very cluttered, etc. Controversial colouring, controversial 70s carpets, etc. Knowing when they exist and when you can take them out, and the upside when you do, and being able to assess value at both points. But then, I've been working with Ripehouse with a lot of investors in Brisbane lately. You're seeing high set, low set. How do you value accordingly between sort of discrepancies or cultural or regional type elements, and how do people pay? So it does need to be subjective to the suburb, but it's trying to get this sort of structure around this assessment, because I'm just going to run through these slides very quickly. I've got low socioeconomic, average and high, and these are 3 sort of case study images I would assess to be poor condition in each of these suburbs. Obviously on the low socio side, you've got boarded up windows, you've got very poorly presented gardens, no front fence, whatever it may be. You've got very original kitchens, no preparation for sale whatsoever. Excuse me. Average socio, it might be tidily presented for sale, but it's controversial in its elements and how it is positioned here. That would sort of push it onto the lower rung where it's not appealing to a wider audience, even though maybe the bones are better than it's sort of suggesting. And then high socio, I've sort of seen and noticed, they might be architecturally designed houses from the 70s where things are sort of starting to crumble around the edges, but the standard and fit out was, originally very good. That's how I'd probably assess sort of the poor condition in these suburbs. I'm just jumping through. Oh, sorry, go for it, Jane.
I was going to comment on that very interesting shower head in Bel Air. I don't know if it was a fan or not, but exactly right, Jacob. I think that you can do 90% of all of the studies without doing a walkthrough. 90% of the information is available on the website for you to actually get down and find as much information as you possibly can.
Yeah, and I suppose it's getting 80%, 80-20 rule, getting down to the key 20% or whatever it may be, and then performing obviously the more detailed due diligence on that. But waving our way through the irrelevant stuff potentially. But yeah, I can talk to that a little bit later around once we get to that final shortlist of properties, how we can do that due diligence remotely, and some insurance policies we can sort of take out around third-party sort of rental appraisals or depending on the type of property, obviously. But yeah, these images here are average condition in what I'm sort of seeing in different rafts of suburbs. And these, I suppose, the common theme through here is they're quite neatly presented for sale, tidy, reasonably, but no amazing proportions, an original bathroom and kitchens in most cases, but they are quite well presented. And then this is the good condition. So, good condition in a poor or low socioeconomic area, maybe a 15, 20-year-old kitchen or bathroom, but it's, very tidy, definitely don't need to touch it to get an average or above average tenant or rent amount. And, may have floorboards or floating floors, etc. put in, but it's just trying to get this idea of we have to assess the low side and the high side in suburbs on a suburb by suburb basis, so we know the price spread, but we also know when we're going to be over-capitalising and moving into an inappropriate sort of range. So I just try to set the scene.
I appreciate that. Sorry, I was just saying, so I appreciate that with Ripehouse to kind of, give me a starting point by actually determining what a property's condition is and giving it a kind of the low, average or high point. So I've got some feel for it because obviously that analysis has already been done for that suburb.
Yeah, and this will sort of gain a little bit more context when we start looking at price spreads in suburbs, trying to find areas that are going to be more likely to have more upside in renovations, but then also when we're doing the comparable analysis is obviously critical. So we're not overpaying for a property that's in an inferior condition. I guess what we're sort of talking about and relating it to looking at and becoming more of a science and more sophisticated with how we analyse things is about our daily process and about avoiding analysis paralysis or spinning your wheels. It's been refining this process, opening our catchment area, increasing our comfort level with these areas, becoming local area experts from an investor's perspective, so not necessarily as a local owner-occupier, but really critically analysing these areas, being able to find and source suburbs that have that upside, that capital growth, being able to assess reliably condition, and then we know that we potentially are buying under, and then being able to, in direct relation to what we're talking about tonight, value a renovation and when to overcapitalise. So in this conversation, it's about having that process, being able to use the right tools at the right time, find information and plug it in, and then act with absolute clarity and conviction in our decision making, so we are avoiding the analysis paralysis type scenario. In doing that, I'd love to introduce now, we're going to be analysing Preston in Victoria. I'll jump into the map page within Ripehouse in a moment to demonstrate, and we can talk through, Jane, why we've sort of come to Preston. In doing that, we'll be looking particularly for sweet spots around high price disparity, lots of houses, owner-occupiers, and we can detail why we're sort of doing that. But I can explain to you some tolerances we might have for some of the key metrics in the suburbs, so we can sort of really have very fine-tuned focus on the areas that might give us the most upside for capital growth and that renovation potential. So that's street level analysis, comparable analysis, and how we can potentially buy below market. And this is using version 3 of the core Ripehouse software. So this is the full annual subscription. So all of the Ultimate Guide to Renovation students with the customized functionality for the last 3 months, this is the annual subscription. It's got a few extra features, so I'll be pointing those out to you, and that's available as in our community membership. So I'll just change slides here. Bear with me for a few moments while I click around. And Jane, if you could just confirm with me when you actually see a map page.
Got it.
Through. That's all come through. If anyone can't see that for others, let me know on the questions and I'll pull up. What I've done here, it's gone straight in a deep dive into the suburb level page. So this is a couple of levels down. You can do some suburb level searching and refinement, property level searching refinement. This is assumed we have already lasered in on this suburb to focus on. So I was going to take us through, if I just get our bearings a little bit, I'll just zoom out on the map here. There's a lot to this page, and you can spend half an hour really dissecting and learning and becoming that local area expert in the suburb. I'm going to be skipping through some of the key functionality to illustrate our point tonight with it. So definitely grab me with any questions, etc. After the webcast tonight or via email, etc. But yeah, lots of things that you can do on here that I will try and illustrate, but I do understand time sort of requirements. So going up another high level, where in Melbourne, if we were looking with eyes on Melbourne to invest, and Jane, can you talk about some of the techniques you might use in doing that analysis with your students?
Sure. So before we get to, actually diving into the suburb analysis like, we would do here with what we've chosen with Preston, what we teach is using a dot map technique. So actually getting a feel for what has been happening in the past and what could potentially happen in the future. So we're almost anticipating the next hotspot. So that's around the ripple effect. So we're talking about the fact that, when people can't afford in one area, they're going to kind of flow on to the next area. But we want to have, population demand. We want to make sure that the properties are fit for market. They're comparable to the neighbouring suburbs as well. So what we will see. So for instance, here's an example. I was looking in 2006 in eastern suburbs Sydney for a property. Kensington and Coogee and Randwick all had median prices of $1 million. Kingsford had a median price of $670,000. So when people couldn't afford Kensington, Coogee and Randwick, they'd look at the next suburb, Kingsford. Kingsford today has a median price of $1.4 million. So you're trying to anticipate that next area. So for me, it's when we kind of do this zoom out in Ripehouse and then maybe put on the capital gains kind of tab or whatever, we're actually looking at the areas of taking off. Brunswick, Northcote, Ivanhoe, all of these kind of areas have a real, or Coburg have a real kind of almost inner city living, where people who couldn't afford to be inner city have moved to the next stage, and now we're looking at the next step. So Preston Reservoir, so we're kind of moving out. And specifically around also infrastructure lines. So, where you see major roads and where you see major, train stations, etc., they also create a hub. So you kind of have that flow-on effect, if you think about it, a bit of a spider's web, where around the CPD, 5, 10 Ks out, but in addition to that, you're also going to have these hubs out that could go out even faster than the flow-on effect of the suburbs moving out. So, Preston was one of the areas that kind of, I've got quite a few students at the moment have shared their dot maps with me, and
beautiful.
And I think we had a talk with Terry Ryder last week, and he was talking around these areas going out to the north of Melbourne as well.
Beautiful.
I think he had Epping, did he?
Yeah.
On his list.
So Terry
Right?
comes from definitely Epping's on there and out to Craigieburn and Layla with Terry, and he's focused around his recommendations at hotspot.com.au are focused around, in this particular scenario, the infrastructure spend. And in his report, I think he also mentioned it is a channel or an avenue of focus at a legislative or government level, where they have sort of given priority to try and encourage population growth through this channel. And yeah, I love to see. So we're sort of talking about three things now, Jane. I suppose with your dot mapping and analysis exercises, I love to see overlap between that theory and price disparity and ripple effect. I love to see overlap with other metrics around Terry Ryder's reports, which are comprehensive research and analysis that he's performed to provide suburbs that he recommends. And just talking with Terry and regions coming out towards Epping and Craigieburn for his research and how that's mapped. And Ripehouse then relates it back to the blue areas that you're seeing here as another sort of overlay, where the darker the blue colour at a suburb level, the higher the capital growth score, which is literally, it's a very simplistic approach, but it's looking at sales volume increases in the short term and rental per week increases in the short term. When they're in alignment, it's demonstrating that they're more likely to have short-term capital growth, short to medium-term capital growth. So I suppose it's nice to see overlap between three different approaches. They're all related to demand and demographics and how people are choosing to live in a suburb. But we're definitely seeing a very strong correlation with the transport hubs and infrastructure, one sort of suburb out at a time, as you're sort of saying, pushing price further out. So we could be equally looking at Epping for a different reason. It maybe doesn't have the price disparity to justify a profit and renovation for profit type strategy at the moment. Purchase prices are lower. It is sort of a little bit further out, and that's why we've sort of focused our attention tonight on suburbs closer in. So the first suburb closer in, zooming in, there are some sophisticated, so this is assuming a purely capital growth strategy. You can go with purely a cash flow strategy and click on the cash flow toggle here, and this is going to highlight suburbs to you that have higher yields, but also a strict minimum vacancy or maximum vacancy rate and stability and tenancy scenario. So the darker the orange here, the higher the yield suburbs, and we've also got a toggle here we can click on and see the higher flipping suburbs, which have really dense owner-occupier clusters with lots of houses, as an example, which is generally not going to be the case in these suburbs that are closer into the CBD. They've usually got a critical mass of tenants in them. But we've come to Preston from a few different directions, and it really has peaked towards a lot of potential. I suppose the next point, Jane, is trying to work out why people live here, what we're trying to achieve with our strategy, which is above average or at least average capital growth for Preston. What areas might be sweet spots in that analysis? What areas do we want to stay away from and potentially might be dead spots? So it's getting a real feel for the drivers, bringing people towards Preston and potentially which areas to avoid. But I am aware of time, so we're looking like, I might just jump through things at a higher level.
Or just talking at a really high level here, just having that kind of the map and having a look at, infrastructure. We can see where the roads are, we can see where the train line is, we can see where the major roads are, how far it is from, say, maybe the ring road to get in the ring road or get into the city where the trams are. But also that big Northland shopping centre seems to be surrounded by what seems to look like commercial area too. So that might come up a bit later in the analysis as a bit of a, not the sweet spot, for instance. So you're looking very big picture here. It gives you a very clear and quick look at, what the suburb looks like literally from an aerial view.
Yeah, and then sort of taking a little bit of a deeper dive, we'll see how that relates to price and potentially combinations of that location and what we can see on the map, how that sort of results in a sweet spot where price may have the most focus on demand for that area and drive price up faster than the suburb overall. If we were thinking of capital growth for this suburb in the next 3 years, there may be areas that don't move. We want to be obviously involved in the areas that do move. So at a street level within the suburb, this is where the sophistication, I suppose, of the Ripehouse tools sort of really gains traction, where we've come to the suburb and we've got robust facilities to get to the suburb in the first place. But once we're here, how do we maximise our upside for our strategy, and having focus on that strategy and not being blinded by the lights of other strategies. And it's looking for things in Preston here. We can see the suburb outlined with the white border. Obviously, each of the red icons are currently for sale properties. We can see the darker the red, the more expensive the property price. But when we can click on these toggles over here on the left-hand side, we can see exactly where things like public housing are located. So suddenly here, each of these bordered areas comprises of 200 dwellings. The darker the red colour, the higher the percentage of public housing. So Preston has 6% public housing. This really dark red area over here near the shopping centre has 41% public housing. The area next door has 30% public housing, and this one just above it's 26.9%. So really quickly we can see exactly where the public housing is focused over here near the shopping centre and also near the industrial area. Forgive me, I haven't actually been to Preston, but I'm trying to speak to it. This potentially may, public housing and high levels of public housing. For this type of inner city suburb area, there's usually clumps of high public housing and areas with no public housing, but it will start introducing volatility and risk to an investment. It may still be in 5 years' time a dead spot as far as capital growth. You may have had patchy vacancy rates, difficulty with maintaining quality tenants throughout that time. You may have had substandard rental growth. Obviously yields haven't grown, and that's a risk factor. You may also you may have may be able to leverage lower prices with higher percentage of public housing now, and have more upside to suburb median and above if public policy changes. If this public housing is dispersed or owner occupied, buyback, etc., you may actually have more upside. But it's definitely, I suppose, the key consideration here is knowing how to find public housing, knowing its positives and negatives, and knowing if it's appropriate for the strategy. But this is just one toggle here on the left. We can go through and see exactly where owner occupiers or tenants are choosing to live. So I'll go through this quickly, but basically yellow in summary is where tenant demand is strongest, and green is where owner occupiers are choosing. So definitely owner occupiers over here towards the southwest, and tenant demand here near the train station. We can see exactly where units and houses are located. So I'm all of a sudden seeing a very quick correlation here between units and tenants and houses and owner occupiers, which, going back up to a theory level, I suppose, owner occupiers, if you're looking at a flipping strategy and executing a flipping strategy, maybe, which is sort of taught in your courses, Jane, I think, around more likely to pay a premium for a positive or a premium renovation, where a tenant or an investor may not pay that. I like to see a correlation between the most in-demand property type and a reasonable amount of tenants. So in a moment, we can look at our tolerances for those and let me know what you're sort of thinking. But
what's nice here also that most people don't get, just in that property type tab, is that, as you said, each one of those little white blocks is 200 properties. So if you click on one of those yellow ones, like that one, up the top comes the information that gives you, the rental density, the unit density. So all of a sudden, if your strategy is to buy a 3-bedroom house, you're in an area that 60%, in that kind of street area, 60% of the properties are units. So, it gives you, a lot of people get down to a suburb and go, thank goodness, I'm at the suburb stage, now let's find a property. Where in actual fact, what you can very clearly see here is there's actually better areas within some suburbs to match your strategy. And I think that's what's often missed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's matching it to the strategy as well, because people can come to Preston with different things in mind. And there's potentially vastly different areas that are going to suit different strategies. And it's knowing, this could be operating very effectively for three, fundamentally different strategies. A very high yield cash flow strategy with potentially lots of volatility and capital growth because of public housing, but you can leverage that with high yields. A very strong price disparity, seeking out owner-occupier enclaves, selling a very prestige product in a short time period for a flip, where there's lots of other houses, and they're most in demand by the residents of the street. And then a capital growth strategy. Typically at a street level, I sort of look for the big three with a capital growth strategy. One of the reasons why we may have come towards Preston in the first place is because rents have been increasing. So let's focus in on streets where tenants are at least having a reasonably strong demand for, that also have above average rent for the suburb and also above average yield. Above average rent, we can click on the toggle here. Darker the purple, the higher the rent. So definite clusters over here towards owner occupiers, high yield. Over here in the public housing has obviously got high yield, or you'd assume so. But there's also showing the terrain of yield in the suburb as well. So if you're coming into Preston has 4.8% average yield, but if you've actually got a 6% requirement for your next purchase, you can actually filter and only show the areas that have 6% and make sure you execute against that. So you've got a lot of resources here to play with, but what I really wanted to spend time on tonight is this custom toggle, which is a new functionality we released. We really try and listen to what individual users of Ripehouse are asking for and choosing, and how they're using it, and the feedback we get, and adapt quickly. Custom toggles is something that's just been the last 2 weeks. The individual suburb level toggles at a higher level were about 6 weeks ago. We're trying to always improve, but I suppose
I thought you were going to jump over that toggle then, Jacob. I was going to say, no, go back. I've been playing around with it. I love it.
Just to get a bit of our feel for the suburb, we've got 98 currently on market properties. So Ripehouse goes off as a search engine like Google, and it amalgamates listings. It's doing a lot of the searching for you and bringing them together in one point. So we've got 98 on market properties. The current price spread for those properties is 362 to 564. Next question is, that obviously includes houses or units. What are tenants and are also the most common properties in the suburb, and that's 3-bedroom houses are most common. Let's not complicate the waters. Let's look for 3-bedroom houses. That's what people are demanding to live in the suburb now. We don't want to be left with like a white elephant. We don't want to be left with the only 5-bedroom house or 1-bedroom unit in the suburb or street. I want to now see the price spread for 3-bedroom houses. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jane, but I usually just lump in 4 bedrooms with 3. It's usually a similar type of tenant, usually a similar type of property, and I don't really want to rule out, have a too tight a range on properties and rule out 3 or 4 bedrooms.
Absolutely, and sometimes real estate agents have a 3-bedroom property with a bit of a study nook and call it a 4-bedroom. So
Yeah. And then having said that, this is a whole nother webcast and a whole nother concept. Low socioeconomic areas, Preston's probably not one. Rural areas. Sometimes I might not actually target 4 bedrooms deliberately, just because you're introducing a higher density of people into the dwelling, more exposure and risk towards hot water systems and all wear and tear throughout the property. 4 bedrooms is generally more likely to house more than not just one extra bedroom. It might open it up to larger. So sometimes in rural areas, and my personal experience, my 4-bedroom house had that problem, and that's sort of my personal rule now. So you can sort of apply that with the tools. So 4 bedrooms are great, but I probably wouldn't pay more in those types of suburbs. It's a big sort of caveat, and it doesn't. Yeah, it's a whole other assessment. But I'm just sort of trying to make the point around sort of clumping 3 and 4 bedrooms, and I sort of do a similar thing for 2 and 3 bedroom units in searches. But this has now got us down to 15 properties that are on the market. So obviously a big jump. We've got a big glut of other types of properties on the market, and they might be slower to shift. We can track the days on market for each of these properties on the market here. It's popped up the table here with the properties. We can track immediately if any properties have been discounted. So there's actually no discounting on these 15 houses at the moment. You can see the full listing history of all on-market properties within Ripehouse. It might suggest that properties are just not being discounted, or houses in Preston are not being discounted. But we can see, and perhaps most importantly, the price spread has changed. So it's 727 down to 518. So it's actually widened. Rent hasn't necessarily widened, but that's giving us our new point of reference, and I think that's the most important point of reference. So jumping into the custom tab, each of the key metrics in the toggles that I talked about before are listed horizontally. Each of them you can adjust the toggle, the slider here to adjust your tolerance for each of them. And you can see that there's 65 areas in Preston. As you tighten up the tolerance, the areas that satisfy the requirement for that horizontal line item reduces, and that flows through the areas of the level of filters, one into the next. And as you can see at the bottom, we've been presented with 29 areas currently selected just by reducing that toggle. Now, there's a lot of assumptions and a lot of research and correlations and numbers that have been proven to come across at a street level what the different default strategies would demonstrate and require. And you can click on these badges up the top here to pre-fill the toggles with the suggested tolerances for what we're trying to do. In this case, for this type of inner city suburb, it's got a very strict tolerance on public housing. I'm happy to open that out a little bit further. I'm noticing I'm getting 61 suburbs areas in the mix here, each area with 200 dwellings. I just really wanted to avoid those very high public housing areas. I have a general rule, 20% public housing in inner city is not going to have a dramatic effect on street appeal for sort of quite dense living, but it's also subjective to the suburb. So if 20% is going to rule out 90% of the suburb, then you've obviously got to probably open it up a little bit because it's a lower socioeconomic area. And if it's a very prestige area, Tilrac or Camberwell, you may be more sensitive to public housing and adapt to that. But it's all about seeing how many areas fall through the net. If it's becoming too small a number, are you willing to open up your tolerance for that metric, or are you willing to move on to the next suburb? That's the question. But we're starting to see these fall through the gap with this default capital gains structure. Jane, you were talking with occupancy type to get a nice sweet spot between having enough tenants to drive rental demand, but then also having enough owner-occupiers to justify the renovation. What sort of numbers do you like to look for there?
Look, I actually look between 30 and 70%, so very similar to those numbers there that you've got through all your analysis. But I like to have at least 30% owner occupiers. Those people who are house proud, who are improving the area, who are looking at making sure the street appeal for the entire area is looking good, rather than maybe 90, 95% tenants who haven't got a lot of ownership of of improving what the properties look like. So, you know, I do cap it at that, and I'd say a minimum of 30% because I want to make sure that there is a market for me to actually have for tenants to come and rent my property once I've renovated it.
Beautiful. Yep. This next one here, we've got making sure we've got lots of houses. They're the most in-demand property type in the suburb. So if we set that there at the median or above, so median amount of houses or more, by default it's selected average rent and above. Lower quartile income, we can tighten it up a little bit or above. So it's making sure we've got high incomes backed up by high rents. And then yield. So we might want to tighten up the yield requirement and get down to, you know, if we're sort of hovering away here at 5% yield, we're still going to have 8 areas. If we tighten it up to 5.25 here, we're getting 5. I sort of like to see getting out of this process about 1 in 4 suburbs coming through the net, maybe sort of slightly less with these large suburbs. If we're getting 5, sort of 8 to 10 areas in a suburb that are selected by our tolerances, it's going to give us a nice mix of areas. You know, we can play around with this. This is probably what I would recommend for this suburb, and this is quite subjective. So in using these tools, I'm on hand and working very closely with you to use them and interpret them. We can save these tolerances, we can share them, and we can save them to apply to the next suburb or load again when we load the suburb. But if we run with this now, we're going to have 5 areas that have presented to us. It's very important. I generally really like to see when we've come out with 5 areas to focus on, that they are clumped together. And you know, they might be clumped together for the same reasons, but they're generally an enclave of people who are living in the suburb for the same reasons, choosing to pay more to rent and live together, and in the same types of property. And so they're all nicely clustered, and they do seem to be following that train line through the middle of the suburb. I will just zoom in a little bit here. Following the train line. However,
I was just going to say, Jacob, that with the yield, you know, if you look at the average household yield in Melbourne, you know, you're under 4%. So, you know, this is some great yield areas.
Yeah, well, I think that's sort of the suburb overall was 4.8% as a general area. The one point I've made probably is quite obvious here, that there's only one property actually sitting in those areas on market at the moment with Preston. So what it's all about is just clicking on the added to my suburbs list here. Now the suburb is added. Our custom overlays are saved. We can now go in and only show us houses that are located in those custom areas. This takes a few seconds to apply. In some cases, there's lots of properties on the market. It'll just do its thinking there. But it's getting us to a point where we can save this filter, save the suburb, and we might have 3 or 4 suburbs where we've actually, you know, we've become these local area experts. We've found the streets that have the most upside, the most potential to execute. We've got those ready to go, and we're monitoring properties coming in and out of the market in those areas only. So as I say, there's only one here. You know, potentially it might have been a better example if there was multiple to compare them with each other. But you can see how we've got from lots to little quickly, and we might have half a dozen suburbs we're focusing in on, and we become experts at monitoring on-market activity for these properties. So we can see the property here, we can see all the images, we can see the days on market. This one's only come on the market recently. What we're doing again, and I'll take you through this quickly, is trying to assess condition of the property, looking and ticking the boxes for street appeal, you know, very tidy. Probably it is not quite neutrally, it's fitting with the property obviously, but it's not neutrally presented. However, it's not to the detriment of the property because it is a specific type of property in this case. Probably not on the surface investment class stock. The only knock I can see is an unrenovated bathroom, but it actually seems to be sort of mock older style renovation. So it is, you know, this is a prestige property. It is quite renovated very well. Our engine for all on-market activity goes away and it looks at the sentiment used by the agent and applies that to the suburb, and it will actually automatically assess the property's condition. It's not perfect. It gets it right a lot of the time. It's always getting better and we are fine-tuning it. But what this is doing, we are going to agree with the condition or disagree. In this case, I'm going to agree, and that's going to go away then and find comparables that are in a similar condition. And it's going to shortlist them in order so we can sort of save time in vetting those comparables, because I think we've got to really own the process of, so this is where the full listing history is displayed, of owning the comparables that come back to a property and being responsible for them. It might not be enough to just go away and get a report that has 6 properties on there, because some of them might not literally be comparable. It's about looking at these top 6 properties presented in some order, and I generally find one that might be the outlier that's outside of the range of the other 5. Starting with that one, is that inferior or you know, a higher standard of property? And then we can view all the images and we can assess yes or no, take them out of the mix using the same strategy, and then we're brought in the seventh most likely comparable into the mix. And now we have, and you own this range, you own individual properties. We can view all the images there and the block sizes, etc., in the listing, the original listing. Once we're comfortable with those properties and we have curated that list, it will take the averages of them over into the appraisal stage. So I suppose what we're taking you through now, Jane, is this is the robust suburb search, the street analysis, becoming local area experts. We've got that custom toggle there. We're really owning that process of knowing the price spread. We've been able to filter out properties that are irrelevant, and we're really focusing on the cream of the crop. And then this has done a comprehensive comparables analysis. It's got us to 780 as a baseline, and then it's showing you exactly how the property price is affected by its location. And this is, really important. If it was in a high public housing cluster, it's going to tell us you'll adjust the price downwards accordingly. If it's too far away in these inner city or quite dense suburbs, if it's too far away from the key amenities and you're outside of that walking range, it's going to be big down negative effects on appraised value. And so this gives a lot of clarity on that relationship, because it's all well and good to be, I suppose, have all the information, but we have to relate it back to price, and we have to relate information to negotiate with the agent, and this is sort of giving you that information to do that. And I suppose when you own that comparable process, the comparables that you agree with. If the agent's coming back with 3 comparables that you disagree with, you've already chucked them out. You can use your evidence to negotiate. You can obviously say, I'm not agreeing with that comparable, take that out of the mix, and if we do that, then this is probably the fair value of the property, and this is my comparable, you dispute that. It's giving you that armory to be able to have that conversation in a nice way, and then have the agent go away and say, well, I've actually got this offer here, probably this comparable has been used and I will disagree with it, and they're going to do the negotiation on your behalf if we're presenting things in this way. We can talk about the public housing adjustment, distance to schools, has it been discounted, leveraging vendor distress, etc., from seeing the listing history. And we're becoming this expert to be able to do this. And this is stuff that's all online, and this is using the tool here, which we can do for any suburb across Australia, and that's updated with data that's our engine goes out daily and finds all this new data and puts it into the property. So I know I've skipped over it. You can do some neighbourhood comparisons here, which you can see all the key metrics for all the suburbs' closest neighbours. You can see all 4 rent history, current 4 rent properties on the map here, green icons. All sold properties on the map. You can see full listing history or sold property history for the suburb going back up to 3 years. And you can remove properties off the map based in locations that you really want to stay away from. So you can draw a box on the map here and remove them. Lots of functionality that I won't go into due to time, but yeah, it's a tool that we can really become these local area experts for these suburbs and buy with confidence and clarity, because it's trying to get us to the absolute cream of the crop, I suppose, and do that effectively.
And what's so good about this, Jacob, as well, is that you can save this search. And so you have, as you said, 5 or 6 suburbs. I say usually 3 to 5 suburbs that you really are the expert on. And if there's no properties in that area, you can keep coming back to it, because as the new properties come on for sale, they'll come into those areas. So it's about not compromising to your buying criteria that you need to get to that goal that you want to get to in the period of time that you want to achieve it in.
Yep, absolutely. And if we've got a catchment area that we might be monitoring a few suburbs at the one time, they might not even be in the same city, and they might be doing different things. If our portfolio is big enough, it's monitoring that on-market activity, I've mentioned the term a few times, Jane, about becoming this local area expert, and it's not becoming an owner-occupier expert, it's becoming an investor and an expert in these areas, and it's allowing us to, this is my sort of, and disagree if you sort of would like to refine it, Jane, buying below market and being able to do that remotely and in these remote markets. But having said that, in the suburb next door as well, trying to get a bit of a process together, finding the sweet spot in the suburb using the tools and assessing fair market value for those properties. So seeing how that price spread changes based on those streets, accurately and reliably assessing property condition, finding valid comparables based on that condition that are timely, sold recently, similar condition on location, location-based adjustments, things on the street. Then we've got fair market value, and then it's using all of those things to negotiate down below that market value or further down from the listing price into that territory. So that's just a bit of a quick snapshot of what I've sort of taken things through and how to use tools. a lot of these concepts are sort of touched on and elaborated on in 2 recent publications at Ripehouse, which is The Buyer's Guide to Property Investment, which just talks about how to use that information to negotiate and how to have a conversation with the agent so they negotiate on your behalf. And then the Know Your Property Purchase Strategy ebook there on the right talks at a higher level. So why we come to the suburb in the first place, what is, from our metrics, from Ripehouse's metrics, going to constitute capital growth and capital growth fundamentals. But then when we jump down to the street level, how do we find streets that are going to amplify our strategy? And then how are we going to find properties that are going to amplify our strategy again? So that talks them through that process for each of the 3 core strategies at Ripehouse, which is capital growth, flipping, and cash flow. And those publications are all available on our learning centre, which is Ripehouse, www.ripehouse.com.au/learning. There's also a blog on there where you can keep up to date and also join these regular webcasts, which I do host weekly for all that information. But yeah,
I think just Jacob, one thing I just wanted to mention on that is that, as an investor sitting in your lounge room with your laptop, you're trying to do this research. And what I like about this, from conversations we've had over the years, just the kind of analysis that you've done that have found, for instance, within 100 metres of a school, the property value is reduced, and you've applied that to that fair market value when you do the estimate. So there's so much thinking behind there and statistical analysis that the average person like myself wouldn't be able to do, because you're not always in the market and looking at years worth of sold prices and understanding that there is a difference. So what I like is that you can get in very quickly and see a kind of an overview as well as a summary of all of that sold information that's been applied, and been working through in the cogs somewhere behind the Ripehouse software, and that comes out as a number that looks really easy, but in actual fact there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah, and I guess, we have sort of things we're trying to prove and disprove. One element that we're adding to Ripehouse very shortly, so this is next development and functionality rollout, is looking at flood zones in Brisbane as an example. So overlaying flood zones on a suburb map, looking at properties that fall in and out of those flood zones within the same suburb, and then gauging how that affects property and willingness to pay for that property. So how is price disparity in and out of a flood zone on different sides of the street, or in the same suburb, and being able to appraise that value. So that's the next area of research we're rolling out. Next after that is planning zones. So mapping planning zones visually on the map, and then also tracking price. I suppose to the root of what we're able to do, Jane, is we've tracked all this listing history for 3 years, have an exact location for those properties, and also have exact locations for all of these key things, so we can find the relationships between them. When we find a really meaningful relationship for an investor, we move very quickly in getting that functionality out and used. And so we're always open to ideas, I think is the key. But
good.
This is all about the Ripehouse community. So it's centered around the tools that you've seen. There's 2 ends to that. So it's about the research and the learnings that we put out and digesting that together and help and support around it. Case studies and usage of the tool and different examples that we can go down and demonstrate. And yes, special private and public webcasts events like tonight. It's all about discovering and learning and processing information to avoid analysis paralysis and having clear and convicted decisions that are going to be in line with our strategy. And then it's empowering ourselves with the right tools and the due diligence process that's going to act like professionals. I guess in a lot of these suburbs that we're looking at, this might be a lot of focus, a lot of buyer's agent focus, a lot of professional investor focus. How do we get this process daily, using the Ripehouse tool as an example, to compete in fast-moving markets with lots of professional insight and eyeballs, and then nurturing each other as a third component of the community in our property partner groups, where we'll access to myself and the experts within Ripehouse that will moderate conversation as a group and join together as a group. So I'll just cover off on that. We do provide, as part of the annual subscription, membership in our property partner groups, which is you and 4 other investors with similar interests. What you're trying to achieve next time around, I'm trying to group them as far as similar methodologies and strategies, but different experiences levels, different takes on life and different points in life to offer different perspective. We have private forums where we moderate conversation, ask questions and talk and motivate each other. We have regular video and private catch-ups, and then we talk and follow through case studies. And these groups are really great at holding each other accountable. We talk about what we're trying to achieve in our goals, about learning and digesting Ripehouse and other information sources, and bringing them all together and using the tools, and supporting and advising each other in private conversation, and to think bigger and really motivate each other to dream and achieve what we're trying to do. So, as part of the Ripehouse community, I've had some really great feedback recently, and Guy is someone I worked with or used the software, and I worked closely with him in using it to find the property in Woodridge. Guy's a very experienced investor. He actually follows Terry Wright really closely with his research and properties. Looked into the Logan area in Brisbane, which is a real hotspot at the moment, and he was able to purchase in Woodridge. We were able to do a comparables analysis with him, get from 289 down to 271,500 as a purchase price. It's in a really high yielding of Woodridge. There is a bit of public housing in Woodridge, but that was a really good result. Donna and Cassandra were talking about our recent functionality improvements, and Andrew over here on the right purchased recently in Cairns, which has got sort of coming around, and it's probably had a few false starts, some great capital growth fundamentals up there, and he was able to purchase with an excellent yield, which is very fundamental to the Cairns market. So a little bit of insight, and I guess before I go in, I really hope you've benefited, and I really thank you for your time in coming tonight, Jane. And as a real thank you for the Ultimate Guide to Renovation users coming along and listening to your insight and my insight, I'd love to offer everyone who's watching tonight a discount on our subscription. As I've mentioned, it's an annual subscription of $997. That opens up the tool and the learning and the property partner groups. And just as a thank you for coming along with Jane and I tonight, and I'd love to offer you a $200 discount, which is available for the next hour only, and that brings the price down to $797. So I'd just like to take this opportunity, Jane, for coming along, and thank you so much for sharing your
pleasure, absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I know you said it was going to go for 50 minutes, but I'm afraid I'm a bit of a chatter, so apologies to everyone.
I was enthralled by what you had to say and the insight that you have, so I'm sure everyone has the same opinion. But yeah, we'll open the floor up to some questions in a moment, I really do thank you for coming in. This offer here, the $200 discount, is for the next hour only as a thank you, and I'd also like to include in that offer one-on-one investment coaching with myself. And this is to the extent of using the tool and really leveraging the tool, the learning, what you're trying to achieve with the next strategy, bringing it all together to thrive using the software and to really nail the next property purchase. And I'm doing that together with you via Skype, via email and phone, whatever it takes to get that next purchase over the line and execute against our strategy. So you're not alone with using the software and processing the learning and getting it applied. I can bounce ideas back with you with comparables and negotiation strategies, etc., and we can get this one really executed well. So that's included in the next hour only. That's available if you're able to go into to grab that offer for the next hour at www.ripehouse.com.au/discount. You're able to execute that discount through that page with the Join Ripehouse button, which is about halfway down. I will also be sending it through to an email to those who attended tonight, so you are able to lock it in there as well. And this is something that I'm really pleased to be able to offer you with Jane coming on board tonight. She's very amazingly.
I think you twisted my arm. Actually, I have to say, Jacob, when you said I'm gonna do one-on-one mentoring, I'm like, oh gosh, the pressure. Me too. Okay. This
is such an amazing offer, and I really truly thank you for opening this up to the attendees tonight with this offer of offering 30 minutes direct coaching with you to talk about. If you want to talk about what you generally do and how you, so structuring and strategizing, also the mortgage broking arm, how to structure loans and potentially which loans are going to be the best and available, and then obviously talking through the Trident strategy and the content of the courses and renovation tips. That price here of $230, that's you at an hour-long session, Jane. That is half of that, and that is an amazing value there. And I really thank you for making that offer tonight.
I mean, as you can use that 30 minutes for whatever you want, but running past property selections and your buying criteria, and do they match up, or just solidifying what your goals are, or whatever. You got 30 minutes to use my brain as much as you need it.
And in addition to that, a reference here with the book. So a free copy of the book within the next hour as part of that special offer, which is an awesome resource. And it goes into obviously a lot of detail around at a higher level what we're sort of trying to achieve. And just sort of tying it together, Jane, with Terry. I have touched on Terry's content and reports tonight as well, and he provides great 10-page reports on suburbs, why it's going to go ahead, and he's very thorough in how he presents, and I love what Terry does at hotspotting.com.au. So I'm offering a free city or state level report from him, which is usually valued at $77, just to get us really moving. We've got coaching session with you, Jane, the book as a reference point, the one-on-one coaching with me as part of that discount, and the writer hotspotter report there, to get us a little bit of focus on potential regions or cities across the nation that have some upside. So that's all available for the next hour. And just for that link again there, which is www.ripehouse.com.au/discount. Within the site, we have live chat integrated into the page, so you can jump on there and talk directly in real time and ask and receive answers to questions. That can then also come through to the 1300 number on the site, and also my email, which is opened up to whenever you've got any questions or need. And this is all secured and paid through PayPal, which is our payment provider. They store your details. We don't provide those for safety and for your risk. And this is all backed up by a 30-day money-back guarantee. Because I guess what we're talking about now, Jane, and getting it back to DIY property investment, is owning this process and empowering ourselves to be able to rinse, repeat, and get really good at that process. It might not be for you, and the buyers agents are out there in the market. They provide an amazing service. They can do this for you, and it might come for a fee of $10,000 or whatever it may be, and they might get you an equally good investment and result from the process. However, you might not learn much from that, and you're not getting any closer to being able to rinse, repeat that next time around. So you are able to use the tools and the research for 30 days, and if it is not right for you, there's that guarantee there with things as well. Once again, Jane, I really appreciate your time. I'm going to open the floor up now to some questions. So jump in, fire away, and if I'm really aware we've gone way over time, so I do apologise. So we might not be able to get to too many, but if we do miss you, jump me personally at jacob.field@ripehouse.com.au or my mobile number there. Once again, Jane, I really appreciate you coming along and sharing your knowledge with everybody.
And look, it's an absolute pleasure, and I just love the new functionality, and I know what you're doing and your big plans with it, and just the fact that we've got 3 years worth of data that it's allowing us to leapfrog ahead of everyone else in the market is just a wonderful tool. So I'm an absolute a fan.
And we need to watch out for your next intake of the Ultimate Guide to Renovation, because it's an amazing resource and an amazing community.
September, watch your inbox.
Really? Beautiful. We've got a question here around the data, and I suppose it all comes back to the data and how regularly is that updated. So based on the different types of data, it is updated differently. Our search engines, as I say, go out and have roughly 24-hour delay in picking up new listings and updating to those listings. Stuff like public housing goes back to the 2001 census, which you're a very big fan of, Jane. I know. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's now 4 years out of alignment. So we 6 monthly go out and at a local government area level look at changes in public housing policy, shiftings in and out of areas, and where that's occurred, we jump in manually and update it. So it's obviously a very comprehensive process, and we've got to monitor that and spread it out. But we're always doing that. So public housing data is kept up to date. That's sort of applied also a similar concept to property occupancy type, etc. Things like suburb area level metrics. So you can see all volume data, you can see days on market, you can see vacancies and yields. That's then updated. When we get all property listings coming through, it's a rolling average that's updated in real time. So we've got a 3 monthly rolling number and you've got a yearly rolling number, and it's about comparing the two and seeing the differential to see the trend is the key. So based on the data, it's a different source. But there are a couple of other questions there, Jane. I might hold it there and fall through the answers to those via email and get Jane's input, because we have
more than happy
time. Good night, everybody, and I really appreciate you coming and spending the time tonight. And once again, Jane, thank you so much for coming along.
Absolute pleasure, and good night, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.